I'm defying. Hard labor, I came here to modify the system. Take them down if they ain't listening. Straight demolition. From young, everything resistant. Good times I don't really miss them. Gotta pay the cost, no tick. Wick, this hard labor and I'm kicked. Never fit in with the crowd or got into politics. You can tell I'm built different. Trust me, it'll be a sequence of events if you touch me. Even when the women do it love. I've been eye to eye with great people, but you'll be mistaken if you put another one above.
Hello everyone, welcome to This Week in Tyranny. It's the most hardcore news show on earth. It's a big Mother's Day edition. It's Sunday, May 12th, 2024. Thank you for joining me. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Conrad Rogas. Here we go. Truthandlaw.com is the website. I'm on the OneGreatWorkNetwork.com. Shout out to everybody who's on the front lines with me, everybody who's tuning in and in this fight, because this is a war. Speaking of, I need to release another Warriors Path episode. But this episode is a part 2. It's a continuation of last week's episode. It turned into a part 2 because I was getting to this article that I will read today. It's an article called "Thousands in the U.S. Believe COVID Vaccines Harm Them. Is Anyone Listening?" This is an article by Apoorva Mandavili, published in the New York Times. So, okay, I'm going to break down the article. I'm starting to do this. Then I realize, wait a minute, I need to dive into the New York Times, talk about who owns the New York Times, talk about who owns a lot of newspapers and publishing houses and Hollywood studios, and that's what the last episode was about. So I'm off to a nice controversial start with that one, and it's only going to get more controversial because I choose this article because breaking it down, it really shows a couple of these main ideas that I think people really need to know to be on top of what's going on and to not get scammed, to not get tricked, and to not get thrown into incorrect worldview. So some of these topics I'm going to talk about, I said it last week. It's the straw man argument, it's about damage control, and it's about public opinion. But I've kind of refined that, and the 3 main topics that I'm going to dive into is subtle influence versus direct command. This is something I talk about, right, in the web of control. Corporate public relations. This is what I meant with public opinion. It's about how the news and a lot of this messaging we get now through social media, it's just public relations. It's just like a corporation putting in an advertisement out. And the third idea is negotiations, because it's all about negotiation between the people and the government. These people aren't really in charge. It's just negotiations between the property owner and someone who's trying to get some of their property. So here we go. This is a May 3rd article. Today's May 12th, so pretty recent, right? But this is a timeless article. It doesn't matter when it is, because we're now 4 years since the pandemic, and things are... that was a permanent change. It was like 9/11. That was a permanent change in American life, and the effects of that are ongoing. So before I get into it, last episode I established some of the roots of the ownership of the media, who owns the media. And the main idea with that is the media is really the information and disclosure arm of the federal government and of global government, right? This is who releases their information. See, governments are like corporations. They are corporations. And what they have in common with corporations is that both of those structures are funded by their end users, the customers, as Jeffrey Levine stated in that article I read on the last show, right? The government calls its people the customers, because that is essentially what it is. And a business is dependent all upon its standing with the customer base. And that's the way stocks work. A stock's value, or any company's value, right, is based on what is the public confidence in them. What do people think about that company? Do they believe in it, or do they think that they're worthless? Then those companies go bankrupt. And it's the same thing with governments. The governments that lose their standing with the people go bankrupt, and they're gone. Okay, and this is the same way that a bank is at the mercy of to what degree the people believe in it. If the people don't believe that a bank can give them their money when they need to get their money, they get their money out of the bank, and then the banks collapse. That's what it's called today, a bank run, right? I talked about that last week as well, This is why I made the episode last week, because it all connects with this. So what I'm trying to say with this is that whoever is in power is very concerned with how the people perceive them. This is another lie that we think we're so powerless. Like, the people have no power. What can one person do? Well, maybe one person can't do much, but the general public view of whoever is in power is the noose around their neck. This is why the world is so crazy and upside down, is that because the people actually have all the power. We have all the power, you the individual, and it's always been this way. Who else can have power in the world but the individual? And this is what the New York Times and Fox News and CNN is for. That they're for public perception control. And information's not bad. That doesn't mean information's bad. News stories are not bad. But the entire origin of what a newspaper is it's a public relations project of the state. So I'm going to start the article. Within minutes of getting the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, Michelle Zimmerman felt pain racing from her left arm up to her ear and down her fingertips. Within days, she was unbearably sensitive to light and struggled to remember simple facts. So you can say that's a rare side effect of a vaccine, and I would say that it's an expected and normal effect of injecting a mixture of chemicals into your body. I'd say that is an expected effect. She was 37 with a doctorate in neuroscience, and until then she could ride her bicycle 20 miles, teach a dance class, and give a lecture on artificial intelligence all in the same day. Now, more than 3 years later, she lives with her parents. Eventually diagnosed with brain damage, she cannot work, drive, or even stand for long periods of time. And that's a really tragic thing. Like, I'm glad this article is out here, because this is what these stories are like. What it's done to people. It gives you a helpless feeling reading that. And I really appreciate the author of this article writing this, because at the end of the day, we don't know under what circumstances she wrote this, right? We don't know what she was taught exactly in journalism training, and I don't know what things were implied to her in her workplace. So, she may just be doing public relations for the pharmaceutical companies, or maybe she tried very hard to slip some of the truth in there. We don't know what's in the hearts of these people, right? How can you? But we don't know what her workplace environment is, and that's another thing. People see the world as a place that's controlled through direct commands and orders, and it's not the case. This is another main point of this episode. The world is controlled through subtle influence, in a subtle way. And that's why we don't have a lot of allies in the mainstream, right? The freedom movement, we don't have a lot of help, because most people who are accomplished, or they're in high positions in their professions, the engineers, right, the professionals, the businessmen, that's why they tend to be pro-status quo and pro-government. It's because the truth and freedom movement turns them off, because we tell them everyone is controlled. Everything that every company does is set up, and all of these events are meticulously controlled and connected. And they know from their experience that that's not how things work. That's not how things work in their life. They know. Everybody just does their thing. And yes, there are connections. This is the thing. That's the unseen connections. There's subtle influence. There are connections. And the agenda gets advanced. But it's not like there's a puppet master telling everybody every move. That's not how it works. So that's our fault in not conveying properly what the world is all about. Back to the article. When I let myself think about the devastation of what this has done to my life and how much I've lost, sometimes it feels even too hard to comprehend, said Zimmerman, who believes her injury is due to a contaminated vaccine batch. So contaminated is the charge. And that one word, it establishes your parameters for questioning. This is a pretty simple but effective tactic. It's negotiation. This is the last point. It's all about negotiations. The more firm you begin, the more leverage you have in negotiating with somebody. It's like if you say, I want to buy this for 200, is that okay? If you say that, the person who you're negotiating with is going to see that as a weakness and exploit it, because you already said, you asked a question, you were unsure, right? You were not confident. So they're going to take the high ground and the firm position and say, no, it's worth 350. This is worth 350, and you'll be paying closer to 300 because you've already displayed that you have more to give. You're willing to part with more. So with this article, when they say it's due to a contaminated vaccine batch, well, putting that as your claim, it already takes off the table the other things that it could be. A eugenics program, okay? And all these other things that are going to get my video taken down, right? So you're starting low. It's lowballing. This is all negotiations. So, how does that translate to this woman, Michelle Zimmerman? She believes her vaccine injuries are due to a contaminated batch. Well, if she believed they were due to intentional design, due to a globalist eugenics program, then she wouldn't be selected for this article. And that goes back to what I said earlier, which is that Miss Zimmerman probably wasn't told or coached what to say. Many times people are in these articles, right? Very often people who are chosen for these New Arts articles, they come from these circles directly, from organizations and fellowships, these groups that propagate these collectivist agendas, sustainability, social justice, gender transitioning, transhumanism. That happens, right? I've brought up some of those articles before. But likely she wasn't told what to say. Likely she's not involved in pushing an agenda, this person. And there's no reason to assume that she is. There's no reason to assume anybody is. She has a doctorate in neuroscience. Well, that could mean two things. That could mean she's actually studying the brain, how it could be damaged, how it could be manipulated, and therefore how we can free ourselves and improve our lives, free ourselves from manipulation. You could do that by having a degree in neuroscience. Or she could have a degree in neuroscience and she could be taking huge under-the-table payouts from multinational corporations as like a bribe to put her stamp of expertise and approval on nanotechnology, transhumanism, all this stuff, as many of these doctors and scientists do. Many of them are fully involved. But we don't know, so I wouldn't assume. And this is one of the points I'm trying to make, is that there's no reason to assume any of these people in media are actively conspiring to advance these agendas. And the reason I stress it is because their active participation is not required. They're participating because of the way the structures are set up, the way the societal institutions are set up. Almost everybody is advancing the agendas, and they're a willing slave and enslaver of humanity, but not knowing, not a conscious one, right? Willing but not conscious. So I would say, who knows in the New York Times, about advancing these globalist agendas? I'd say one or two executives know. One person knows in high levels of administration in there, key person, who basically runs the whole show. Without the title, though, likely it's somebody who just gets shit done. But he's not the one in the front page of the newspaper. That person, and then you have a handful of people sprinkled in throughout the organization at all different levels. From treasury to office clerk to the janitors, even. Those people who are fully aware and conscious of what they're a part of. And that's how it goes. You just control a couple of key points, and then the subtle influence works because of the way you've got it set up. And that goes for the New York Times, that goes for Google, or whether it's the Army or Chase Bank. Any given organization, that's how shit works. And I stress that point week after week after week. The agenda advances without a word spoken. Well, how can that be? Well, the mechanics of modern schools, they mold a certain type of personality. They mold the kind of personality that needs validation. Needs validation from, right? They're the kind that needs validation, so they look for central authority. Yeah? That's the kind of personality that follows orders from that central authority, and then they're taught to produce well, but only within that set hierarchical structure with parameters. That's when they can function well. That's when they are productive. Without that structure, they are no longer productive. That's how it goes. That's what happens in public schooling. Then, in the universities, there's a certain type of atmosphere, right? It attracts that specific personality type. That personality type that seeks approval, that needs a gold star. So it takes those psychological qualities, right? Those disabilities, really, needing approval, not being self-defined, driven, and it takes those qualities and it integrates them with a progressive and globalist worldview, where the state or these organizations like the United Nations, or concepts that don't even have a organization corresponding with them, but it takes those big central authorities, and then it uses them as like a cure, that they're the cure for those psychological issues, but it's not even presented as a cure. It's just basically like a hand and glove. It just fits together. That's what happens in the universities. They take on those worldviews because it makes sense to them. It gives them all that validation and fills those voids that they didn't have growing up. And it satisfies their anxiety. It eases their anxieties. So that's what happens in the universities. And then that worldview that they take on, that propels the graduates of these schools into employment or activism with organizations who work towards progressivism and globalism, and through that you've got 90% of the work done. You've got the agenda done. Basically, it works by itself. Okay, you just turn it on and it runs by itself. So Ms. Zimmerman was not told to mention a contaminated vaccine batch. I bet she wasn't. Apoorva Mandavilli likely wasn't told to write about it. All that was done, though, it happened because a term was spoken once or a few times to these people. And it was spoken by somebody they admire. And it had a ring to it, and it got repeated, so it stuck. Contaminated batches. This is what people talk about. And it works because people don't recognize subtle influence, how it works. It works like that. It works through a couple of key phrases repeated, and it hits something psychologically. It latches on. It feels familiar. It feels like it makes sense, so we latch onto it. So people don't recognize that subtle influence. They don't recognize these phrases because they're not as sharp and they're not streetwise enough to bullshit. It's all about recognizing bullshit. So contaminated, the word contaminated suggests that it's accidental, that any harmful effects are due to interference from outside of the chain between designer, manufacturer, supplier, and then distributor or retailer, right? Well, how about no, they're not contaminated. Maybe they're working exactly as intended. I'm going to presume that when depopulation occurs, that's intentional, right? Until proven otherwise. Until someone can show me a powerful central government that doesn't kill its own people. But history doesn't have any examples of that. History has examples of genocides and democides and powerful governments killing their own people time and time again. The COVID vaccines, a triumph of science and public health, are estimated to have prevented millions of hospitalizations and deaths. Yet even the best vaccines produce rare but serious side effects. And the COVID vaccines have been given to more than 270 million people in the United States in nearly 677 million doses. Zimmerman's account is among the more harrowing, but thousands of Americans believe they suffered serious side effects after COVID vaccinations. As of April, just over 13,000 vaccine injury compensation claims have been filed with the federal government, but to little avail. Only 19% have been reviewed. Only 47 of those were deemed eligible for compensation, and only 12 have been paid out at an average of about $3,600. Some scientists fear that patients with real injuries are being denied help and believe that more needs to be done to clarify the possible risks. Now, in this, I won't belabor the extreme bias, right? I'd say some scientists say, and people believe that they were vaccine injured. Oh, they believe it? So they don't get treated like the trans kids. They come home and they believe they're different genders. So someone should affirm these vaccine damaged people, right? Like they need some affirming care, don't they? But I won't belabor the bias. No, but they only believe it, right? So they only believe that they have Guillain-Barré and that they can't stand up or walk. They believe that. But when the entire 2020 lockdown was based on one pseudoscientific computer model, the New York Times said scientists warn and experts agree, right? It was very firm then. Yeah, but now people believe. People believe that they've been hurt and their lives have been ruined. At least long COVID has been somewhat recognized, said Akiko Iwasaki, an immunologist and vaccine expert at Yale University. But people who say they have post-vaccination injuries are just completely ignored and dismissed and gaslighted, she added. Well, this is true, right? In interviews and email exchanges conducted over several months, federal health officials insisted that serious side effects were extremely rare and that their surveillance efforts were more than sufficient to detect patterns of adverse events. It's a nice little, they threw in an advertisement for surveillance, right? Oh, thanks to our surveillance efforts, we've been able to detect patterns. Hundreds of millions of people in the United States have safely received COVID vaccines under the most intense safety monitoring in U.S. history. Jeff Nesbitt, a spokesperson for the Department of Health and Human Services, said in an email statement. Most intense safety monitoring in U.S. history. That's right, yeah? And look at the results. So do you know what the most intense safety monitoring was in other places, say like Germany or Poland? About 1939 to 1945, they had really intense safety monitoring, and then millions of people were killed in Poland, right? And how about Russia? When did they have the most intense government oversight of food and medicine? Well, that would be the Stalinist famines before World War II, where millions of people died. And I don't know. I don't really argue with many people. I don't really get many people who try to debate. But I don't really know what the counter argument would be there, because I keep going back to the Nazis and the communists and say, hey, look what they did. They're doing it again. So I suppose people would say that's different. Those were crazy dictators, and what we have today are not crazy dictators. Well, people have to understand that the more decentralized and weak a government is, the healthier the people are. So I'm not even getting into talking about why. I'm just saying that's historically accurate, not just in the last 100 years. I'm saying in the last 100,000 years. So take charge of your own health. Read about the health problems and diseases. You do it yourself. Figure out the alternative treatments and options. Find people online who have solved it. Find people in person who have remedies. There is no safety in this world as long as there are people who are on a tireless quest for domination over others. That's not a safe world. It's not going to be safe. The safest thing is for you to know your shit and recognize bullshit. But in a recent interview, Dr. Janet Woodcock, a longtime leader of the Food and Drug Administration, who retired in February, said she believed that some recipients had experienced uncommon but serious and life-changing reactions beyond those described by federal agencies. I feel bad for those people, said Woodcock, who became the FDA's acting commissioner in January 2021 as the vaccines were rolling out. I believe their suffering should be acknowledged and that they have real problems and they should be taken seriously. I'm disappointed in myself, she added. I did a lot of things I feel very good about, but this is one of the things I feel I just didn't bring it home. I'm not really gonna get into how much she aggravates me the way she's quoted. I'm gonna talk about the FDA, because the FDA is one of the most egregious and oppressive federal administrations. People don't really share this with me. People don't really like the first thing people get about that's tyrannical. Nobody thinks of the FDA, but for me, the FDA is like, this is one of the first things I want to deal with. I really think it's one of the core problems. When you give a group of people power to control what you can and cannot take into your own body, then you're making an acknowledgement that you don't own your own body. Right? At the very minimum, at the very best, you are saying that you're a child and the FDA is your parent. That's best case scenario, where you have somebody looking into your food for you and making sure that it's good for you to take in. Extremely tyrannical. There is no federal regulation needed for anything. Not for food, not for medicine, for anything. They want to regulate your mood too. That's why the SSRIs are so easy to get. They'll give you your depression medication at the pharmacy right away, but when you actually need something that, is actually something you need, then they make you wait and they make you jump through hoops. That's beside the point a little bit, although I will talk about that. But with regulations, if you know anything about regulators and inspectors, you know that what really assures quality and safety is, number one, the free market, and number two, and really most importantly, the character, the moral code or care, right? It's the values of the person providing the product to you. And that implies then number three, which is really what it all comes down to, is the bottom line is consumer awareness. That's the only real regulation there is. That's the only safety standards there are. It's consumer awareness. It's the intelligence of the people. Again, it's being streetwise to bullshit. That's how we recognize scams and poisonous products, right? And snake oil salesmen, right? We don't need a state license for a doctor. We really don't. Word of mouth provides all of the information that people need. And that's how it goes with other things, You go buy a car, you don't go to what certifications they got. You're going to find out for yourself. You're going to read the reviews. You're going to ask people about how safe this vehicle is, how reliable is it. You're not going to look at the studies that came out. And in fact, often health practitioner having a license is what actually fools the people into trusting them, into letting their guard down. And then there'll be these are the kind of people who go into the profession to abuse people, to mistreat them, and to exploit them. All these people like Jody Hildebrand, licensed therapists. These people get licensed so they could practice their stuff and they could hide behind their license to really do criminal behaviors. Back to the article. The federal officials and independent scientists face a number of challenges in identifying potential vaccine side effects. The nation's fragmented healthcare system complicates detection of very rare side effects, a process that depends on an analysis of huge amounts of data. That's a difficult task when a patient may be tested for COVID at Walgreens, get vaccinated at CVS, go to a local clinic for minor ailments, and seek care at a hospital for serious conditions. Each place may rely on different health record systems. And here, towards the end of this article, you're getting a hardcore tyrannical claim. This is when they're pushing the real shit. And I would say it's likely that she is told to write this. I would say it's likely. But again, don't have to assume. Maybe not. Because it's enough that this idea is repeated time after time. Anytime the federal government is confronted about the damage done to people by their healthcare system, the response we always get is, well, that's because the system isn't strong enough. That's because they're not getting enough funding. That's because they're not regulated enough. It's not collectivist enough, right? It's not unified enough. Why didn't Soviet communism work? Well, Stalin just didn't have enough power, I guess. And that claim is made again and again and again. And it's totally backwards. I go back to this. It is like when somebody has a victim captive and they're beating the victim, and they say, well, the reason I do this is because you don't listen. You don't do the things I want you to. Right? So they will further, that victim will further relinquish their power. They'll get blindfolded, they'll get tied up, they'll get handcuffed, they'll get put into a dark room. They'll go further and further because the person who is keeping them captive is going to tell them that it's because their lack of cooperation is what is getting them hurt. That's what this is. We have a fragmented healthcare system. Well, they want an integrated healthcare system, which is what? Biometrics, it's surveillance, it's that all of your data, no more doctor-patient privacy or whatever, no more privacy rights, but everything is connected into one system, and when you have a centralized system, they got you. Okay? A lack of options always leads to you getting fucked, essentially. When you don't have options, you lose in the world. There is no central repository of vaccine recipients nor of medical records, and no easy way to pull these data. Reports to the largest federal database of so-called adverse events can be made by anyone about anything. It's not even clear what officials should be looking for. So 2 claims are being made here. One, that there should be a government registry of vaccine status, and that's exactly what the vaccine passport is. That's what they're building public support for. And that is how the suppression, imprisonment, and killing of dissidents and opposition groups, that's how that starts. It starts with a central registry. It starts with a central database, always. Nazis, it's always been like this. So that's claim number 1. Claim number 2, that only certain individuals, right, only vetted or qualified or certified individuals can make reports. Which means what? File complaints against the government or against big pharma companies. I'm using the word government to describe them both, interchangeably. Like whether it's the government or Pfizer, that's the same thing essentially. It's a government corporate partnership. The point is, the government is what protects them. It is the buffer between the people and these companies, or the other way around. That is the whole point of corporations. Is there's not one person that you can hold liable. The liability is like a revolving door. So you try to sue one person, well, they're gone. You can try to sue the company, but the company is not a real thing. The company is not something you can grab and say, look what you did. They'll say, well, I didn't do that. The company did that. Well, who's the company? Nobody knows. That's the problem with institutions. That's the problem with dealing with corporations as an individual. So anyway, they tell you that, well, the problem is anybody can make a vaccine report and we don't know if these are credible reports. Well, again, if you're streetwise, this is bullshit. You can't have just anyone making vaccine adverse event reports. No. But you can give an untested vaccine to anyone, a child, a baby over 6 months old, pregnant woman, fuck it, you could take it. But when it hurts you and you have to report it, then you're not responsible enough to report it. You were responsible enough to take it though, but not to report it. Yeah, because like how can we prove that you're a responsible person or that you're telling the truth? Back to the article. I mean, you're not going to find brain fog in the medical record or claims data, and so then you're not going to find a signal that it may be linked to vaccination, Woodcock said. If such a side effect is not acknowledged by federal officials, it's because it doesn't have a good research definition, she added. It isn't like malevolence on their part. The government's understaffed compensation fund has paid so little because it officially recognizes few side effects for COVID vaccines. And vaccine supporters, including federal officials, worry that even a whisper of possible side effects feeds into misinformation spread by a vitriolic anti-vaccine movement. Well, that's true. I am vitriolic, and yeah, any mention of vaccine injuries sets me the fuck off, because I saw it coming. Can you imagine what it's like to see it coming? In November of 2019, I was concerned about this. I actually quit smoking cigarettes in December of 2019 because There was this new disease coming from China. Nobody was talking about it. It was only in the alternative media then. It was not in the mainstream media at all. So when I found out about it in the alternative media, I'm like, oh, this is really going to hurt people, and the government doesn't want people to know about it. So I'm going to make sure to protect myself. This is a smart thing to do, right? You stay ahead of the game. You figure out what's going on. You don't go to the information that everybody else is getting. You go to the information before it becomes mainstream. Yeah. This is generally a good policy to have. But then when in January and February, all the media stations started talking about COVID, the way they were talking about it, I knew it was bullshit. The way they were talking about it, and I can get into this, but again, just being streetwise, you recognize bullshit. So after March 2020, though, people did get sicker than they've ever been, and things have never gone back to normal, to how they were before, and they never will. And the lockdowns did that. The kids that were in school, they're never going to grow up like you and I did. They will always have an irrational fear. They will be ready to obey national government decrees because it already happened to them as a child. It's trauma. The restaurants are never going to be full on Saturday night again. Those lively summer nights in the city will never come back. And that's why I'm vitriolic. I saw the shit coming. And I saw smart and brave men turn into dumb cowards. The world is full of them. Some of them got their balls back a little bit, but you guys, almost everybody folded under pressure when it was time. So that pisses me off, right? So when people talk about all this, and we talked about all this. We said, hey, there's a national we're talking about forced vaccinations in 2005, right? But no, it was a joke then. So then now when it happens 50 years later, we were like, oh shit, guys, you can't take this. This is gonna be really dangerous. This is what people said, right? And then no, we were laughed at. We were not only told we were wrong, we were laughed at. And I don't like ridicule. That shit pisses me off as well. So now people are getting really hurt, and I'm not supposed to be pissed off? Pfft. Look, the worst thing is really what it's done to the future children. Like the long-term psychological and physical health effects, they've done to 2 generations what a war does to 2 generations. It's been like we went through another world war. And there was no biological danger at the time, until there was. The vaccine was introduced. When did we start noticing brain fog, neurological problems, depression, and now the rapid cancers, all these cancers? Not 2020, about a year later and after. Yeah? So we know, you know what happened. And this article continues, but I'll skip a large portion of it because it's really not relevant. I'll go to where they pick this point back up. The claim that it is the people's fault that the government denies and ignores their suffering, because if they admitted it, then that validates the anti-vaccine movement. And they don't want to validate the anti-vaxxers. And this is called victim blaming. That's another classic tactic. Why are you doing this harmful thing? Well, because if I didn't, then this other harmful thing might happen if we didn't. So I'll jump to a section called pervasive misinformation that picks this up. The rise of the anti-vaccine movement has made it difficult for scientists in and out of government to candidly address potential side effects, some experts said. Much of the narrative on the purported dangers of COVID vaccines is patently false, or at least exaggerated, cooked up by savvy anti-vaccine campaigns. Savvy? I wish we had savvy people. Savvy in the way we present information, to do it in a subtle way, to make it resonate with children and young women, right? To have it spoken by respected and popular people. We don't have that. We don't have savvy. The reason that anti-vaccine or bodily autonomy or truth and freedom movement can make a lot of good memes, I guess, like good memes and nice videos and strong cases for conspiracy, is because of the unbelievable amount of data and research and information that is out there to corroborate and confirm it. It's endless. I'm swimming in information that confirms that governing bodies are morally illegitimate, that institutions of power work towards a totalitarian state leading to genocide, and that collectivism completely destroys standard of living 10 times out of 10. I'm like drowning in information that just tells you that time and time again. But people are like, well, you're just saying, you're making all these claims, but I really don't see any proof. The evidence for it is incredibly extensive, and people act like I'm trying to argue for something that is far-fetched and unproven. So this is like a criminal is standing there with a bag of money and a gun, and they're saying, liar, you're the criminal, right? That's what they say. That's patently false. They fact check you. That's just false. That misinformation is patently false, provably incorrect. So why does that work? It shouldn't work. But it works because in the minds of the people, the criminal is who is trusted. Because the criminal is who their parents have trusted. That's who they were molded and taught to trust in school. It's who they've been brought up to trust since they were a child. So the shit works. Back to it. Questions about COVID vaccine safety are core to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign, citing debunked theories about altered DNA. Florida's Surgeon General has called for a halt to COVID vaccination in the state. Shout out Florida. But they stress this. The COVID vaccine does not alter your DNA. No, it does not. It's in the community guidelines. It's actually one of the 2 episodes of This Week in Tyranny that have been taken down for this. Medical misinformation. One of them is YouTube guidelines. One of these claims of medical misinformation is claims that vaccines alter a person's genetic makeup. No, mRNA vaccines don't alter a person's genetic makeup. They don't. But what is mRNA? mRNA is a single-stranded molecule of RNA that corresponds to the genetic sequence of a gene. It's an identical translation. It's a message, a copy of the message of the code that DNA is. Because the body can't work with source code. The body can't work with code because then it would change the code. It's like you can't change the name of a file that you're using in a rendering process. I've done this before. I've messed up an episode like this. If you change the name of something while you're using it, then you would have a missing file because it's a different name. So the computer won't find it. So that's why the body needs an actual translation, like an actual message, and then it can convert that to a protein. Right? DNA is like a template for protein synthesis, for building actual, molecules and proteins. That's what mRNA is. It's the working message. It's the message that can be worked with. So since mRNA is the intermediary between DNA and protein synthesis, then what is the difference between altering that and altering the actual genetic makeup? I hope you're following that. So it's really a joke. It's really a joke that they make this. It's a straw man argument is what it is. It's debunking something that's not the main point. This is another strategy. RFK Jr. said this, and the DNA is never actually altered, so they're wrong. And this is why when you're dealing with cops or lawyers, they'll tell you to say the least amount you possibly can, because any little miniature detail that is wrong, it's going to be emphasized, it's going to be blown up, and it's going to get driven into the ground. They'll spend hours on it to keep the focus on that, to make it seem like a real counter argument is being made, when all that's being done is stalling and avoiding the issue. So don't get distracted from the main issue, DNA versus mRNA. The issue is when you touch protein synthesis, you're messing with the fundamental nature of a human being, what a human being is. And that's just about the end of the article. There's a couple of paragraphs at the end, but I'm not going to go into it because this sums it up well. So essentially, what this article is, the structure of it. Number one, tell the story of the people affected. Right? They gave them a voice. They didn't run from the reality, but they did avoid, through omission, the real sensitive and taboo. But they told the story of the people. Then they gave the justification for the government response. Okay? So you got one side, you got the other side. Then it took the side of the government by talking about misinformation. This article went completely in that direction, talking about centralizing the healthcare system, talking about this is done because of the mass misinformation, because of the anti-vaccine movement. Okay, they took the government side on the low, right, quietly, and then the article was ended by saying more research is needed to help these people. We need to really take care of these people. It kind of goes back to the sentiment at the beginning, which is, these poor people, we really need to do more to help them. But all in the beginning of the article is all government talking points. So it's a very bipolar article, and that is how government treats the people. They make a big effort at the beginning to make you feel valued and heard and noticed, and then all throughout they neglect you for a long time, and then at the end, just when you're about to part ways with them, they make it up to you. They give you this big validation, all this love that you were missing, right? All of this care. It's so that you remember the good things. You remember that, so that you continue to stay on the bipolar ride with them. So you continue to ride the roller coaster. Okay? And you see, this is how abusive relationships work, right? It's a love bombing, then it's all this abuse, and then it's making it up to you. And then more abuse again. This is how it is with sentences. We remember the first and last word, right? First and last letter. This is how it goes. It's preying off of how the human being is set up, right? It's just knowledge of psychology. So our relationship with societal institutions is like abusive parenting to an abusive partner. It's just abusive relationships. So what do? For our children, we have to break the cycle. Learn to be the real you again. We're messing with our mental and spiritual DNA every day by living like a timid, domesticated animal. We didn't come here to be animals. We came here to learn from the animals and teach them and experience love and beauty on a different level than all the different creatures in the world. That's why we're here, and we're not doing our job because we've gotten stuck in fear. Right? And fear is like a protein that has gone out of control. Fear has a purpose in the grand scheme of things in our development. It's an adversary to conquer, and therefore it's really a friend in our journey, provided that we head in the right direction of upward motion. But we're not. Humanity has gotten stuck in a place of fear, which means we're afraid of who we are, we're afraid of nature, we're afraid of experiencing our deepest desires, we're afraid of experiencing big successes and big failures, we're afraid of rejection, we're afraid of our own thoughts, and we're afraid of what other people will think of us, other people that are afraid themselves. So the fear is like this inanimate thing, but it grows and grows like a cancer, like a protein that grows out of control and starts to change our spiritual and mental makeup to make more of itself, because that's all it knows how to do. It's not that fear is evil, it's that you're nowhere to be found to put it in its proper place. It's cosmic absenteeism. We are like deadbeat parents, and we're leaving the world behind. We're leaving our children with no roadmap, with nothing. We ourselves didn't get anything, We are in mental and spiritual lockdown still. It's lockdown. It's been locked down. The mask never came off when it comes to the way we think. So the pandemic and the past few years and this article, it's like a metaphor of the main story. And the main story is ultimately a personal story. It's your story, your personal journey. So will you continue to live in the same four walls that you're in right now? Or will you be the hero in your story and start moving toward a real, free, and genuine world? That's the point. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And let's get to work, right? In this tournament,
The chosen few shall be triumphant and the devil will be decapitated. So you can keep your ducats and your dresses. I won't be emasculated in this world of scientific madness. Scientific madness. My status is the baddest.